opportunity came along during an exhibition in October 2006 to produce a large work for Sydney. Cammeray, just on the north side of Sydney, across the bridge. And this has been a exceptionally good commission to get, and a very difficult one. It's taken really about 3 decades to get it. So we're at Cammeray Engineering today, and the large pieces are just starting to come together, some of the units. The piece in the end will be about 6 metres by 6 metres, so it's a very large work.
I suppose the funding for public sculpture can come from a number of different directions. You can have city councils, you can have state or federal government, but I think another very significant area for the funding of public sculpture has been from developers. They want to add some prestige to their housing estate, some prestige to the building. I think there are other organisations also who say, look, we've done very well, we're quite happy to use some of our funds as a return to the community. It's a gesture, here's a piece of public sculpture, we hope we'll enjoy it. It also means they gain some prestige. You notice such and such a building, buy the sculpture. You can identify the organisation. So it's a mixture, I think, of sometimes generosity and sometimes good publicity.
Again, with this work, it's certainly been a real struggle and a real issue to get the opportunity to do a piece where there's really been no interference in the process. I think that's really important. The first part of the process for me was to actually go to the site in Sydney, which I did. Had a look at the site, came back and started to draw for the work. And for a major work like this, it's always a fairly slow process through drawings initially. A small model was produced of Land Mandala, and then a larger model about 1.3 metres high, and then finally through to the large work.
I think this is very exciting work. It's got a great deal of movement, and I think at a larger scale and placed outside, it's going to be a work to which people are going to relate very, very easily. I think they're going to get a lot of visual excitement from this work.
The making of the piece involves a lot of really quite precise engineering, and that's really been developed up with DeMille Engineering over about 20 years now. So I can only sort of compliment really the guys who work on the sculptures. And the material again, the material I've used for a long time in Australia, Corten steel. The steel ages to colour like the Australian landscape. I've said for a long time I think it fits here far better than bronze or other materials, so it's got a great relationship to our landscape. And of course it's a lot of hard work just simply to cut the steel out, the weight of the steel involved, to get the sections very accurate.
A lot of grinding, a lot of noise. Yeah,
Patience?
A lot of patience, yeah. Very hard work.
And that's pretty well covers
it.
it.
A bit hard to say, yeah.
The fitting together of the sections has to be very accurate, and I think we've got some really good methods for doing that now.
Well, this one we're going to have to move around a bit.
This is the first public sculpture I made in 1978. In the final year at art school for me. This is the beginning of a story really about public sculpture for me rather than public art. I approached the council and said, look, I want to make a large-scale sculpture down on the foreshore. Surprisingly, in a way, they showed some interest in it. They agreed to it, but I actually received no commission for this work at all, which in the long run I didn't mind, but it managed me to get a large-scale work up and one on the ground, in which just the fabrication and such was paid for, and allowed me to get a piece up, I think importantly, that was done independent of a lot of process, and really process in what is now called public art. I think it's become quite a major issue for me. To try to make significant work, one has to have independence, and that's probably been the thing I've really had to fight for over the last 30 years. So this piece here has had, it's good. I've had a fairly free hand in it, and I hope it's going to be quite a major work.
Greg's work is going to have an impact in Sydney. It's a large-scale work, it's a very strong work, it's a work which is going to attract a lot of attention.
When I worked on the piece specifically for Sydney, it's got a degree of sort of, I think, flash about it and a degree of sort of excitement factor about it that fits in a bit with Sydney. I think some of the forms too reflect Sydney in a number of different sort of ways, even though the forms also cross over into references to horizon lines and references to fire and a few other references from the land as well.
Let's get under this. What are you, nearly 6 foot?
The sculpture is actually too big to move by road in this case, so we have to cut the sculpture into half, move it by road, and then at the site at Cammeray we'll actually reassemble the piece. Sculpture's over here in 2 halves. Just arrived about an hour ago.
Stay there.
2 sections on the ground. Starts to get actually quite exciting now. One of the sections we have to move and orientate it in relation to the entranceway where we're standing now. I've stood back, and the first half has been really carefully placed so that we get a sense of motion as you approach the sculpture, a twist, just a sense of movement.
Oh, it's great. I mean, the light coming through here.
Yeah.
The developers here commissioned Rick Eckersley, the landscape architect, to find a solution that gave this place an identity.
Large courtyard garden, and we needed an iconic piece of work to carry the strength of the garden.
Rick's been a champion of Greg's work for a number of years and owns the Greg himself, and came to me and said, look, I've got this idea for an amazing big sculpture.
This has been done through a developer called Hamptons, initiated by Lance Hodgkinson, and I was able to convince him that to bring art into a public space, come private space, it would be an advantage both aesthetically and culturally.
And you can see an enormous piece of public sculpture, which was always a big challenge because it's one of those things that didn't get watered down.
A little bit about the garden. It's a garden on strong dimensional shapes. It has a roof actually, even though it's an open roof. The roof is made up of stainless steel wires, and we're carrying deciduous vines over those wires, and I did get the approval from Greg that his sculpture would be able to be a strainer post for these wires.
Every developer's looking for an edge, something a little bit different. You know, they're looking, trying to sell these things and keep this sort of complex alive. So art's one of those things that's a point of difference. And in Sydney particularly, there's not a lot of public sculpture. Choose someone like Greg Johns, who's an Adelaide artist, to work in Sydney is, I think, a fantastic and ambitious project.
It's interesting that this piece of sculpture was specifically designed by Greg for the situation. We were, as designers or garden designers, really happy for people, both retail and residents in Cammeray, to really come to terms with having a great piece of art in their front door or their back door, and if they can take ownership of that, we'd be very pleased.
We put it together, we bolted together to all be straight, and then we put 25 mil weld on each corner. Putting the two sections together, lining up the plates for these sculptures is quite difficult, and that's what's happening behind me now. We're just finally lining them up so the sculpture is very square and everything's running through cleanly from one side to another. Is that top one running through all right? We've got a bit of an issue right now of getting the crane off site in the next 20 minutes because there's a possible $12,000 fine. And this is what often happens on site. There's a lot of issues occurring at a point in time. So we're trying to get the sculpture secured but get the crane off as well very quickly. So there's a bit of tension around the place.
Here it looks like a series of
Circles, yeah.
It's a repetitive thing.
Yeah.
Biggest heap of rubbish you've ever seen. It's all it is, waste of money.
That looks alright.
Nah, it's crap.
That looks good.
We call that art.
What do you recommend?
That's why you're standing there doing that, and that guy's designing it, because it's a good sculpture, mate. You couldn't do that. It's good. I don't know about the paint job.
What do you think?
What's that?
What do you think?
Oh, I love it. It looks beautiful.
Yeah, no, I'm really.
It's brilliant.
From my point of view, I think it's the most successful work of Greg's that I've seen. I've seen a number of them. I mean, I know there are a lot of them around, and they're in very far-flung places now.
We've got works in, Europe and Ibiza and in the UK, all around Australia.
But I haven't seen one that strikes me that combines so many different registers. It's something that has that industrial sense with the Corten steel, but it also has a very, very strong organic dimension, and it's something that I think will sit well in this space. It's something which actually serves to make the space a little bit animated, but otherwise it's just going to be a big plain square. Of course they're going to do landscaping and stuff like that, but I think the sculpture is obviously going to be the feature, and I think the sculpture sits here extremely well. It's working well within the themes and the ideas and the particular kind of technical things that he's done in the past, but I think it just seems to have moved on a bit.
Some of the early works, which were quite severely and very simply geometric, they were almost static. What we see here is quite a significant change in development.
There's a little bit more oomph in this, and it's a tremendously lively piece. It really does have a lot of energy. It twists, it turns. It looks completely different from every angle you stand.
Instead of it being almost sort of an early modernist design, emphasising the sort of the intellectual qualities, it seems to me here he's moved to a much more organic relationship There's a lot more movement, a lot more visual excitement, I find.
This is his first work in Sydney. He's waited 20 odd years to actually make a public work in Sydney, and so it's been a real ambition for him to actually make something like this.
Sydney is generally not very well served with public sculpture. There's a lot of it around, but it's a very indifferent bunch of things. For a long time in Sydney, it just seemed to be that if you had enough money and you were prepared to donate a sculpture to the city, they'd be happy to take it no matter what it was. And so consequently, we've got a whole lot of monstrosities all over the place.
If we compare Melbourne and Sydney, Sydney has got remarkably few examples of public sculpture. I don't know why.
Property's at a premium. I mean, everything's a development site, so the fact of fitting art into public places is always complicated because there's space limitations. And in Sydney, there's obviously a lot more space limitations in Melbourne and Adelaide and Perth. Certainly in Sydney, the last 10 years, there really has been very little public art added to the public realm. And this would be one of the first and major pieces that they've done the last 10 years. I can't actually think of many that have been as successful or as large.
There have been, in recent years, attempts to do something about it, but again, they've been very strange the way they've gone about it. They've had sculptures by people who aren't really sculptors. They've had a lot of photographers and installation artists and everybody else doing things that pass as public sculptures. This is an absolute dead set sculpture and a public sculpture. I think it works well within the space and it addresses all of those things that sculptures normally address. Gravity, the particular disposition of forms here in this particular area. It's not intended to make a kind of historical point. It's not intended to give you some great social purpose. It's not intended to tell you a whole lot of extraneous things. It is a sculpture which works on a formal basis and I think it will give people pleasure. I think it's the sort of thing that people find it very easy to live with. It's, in Sydney terms, almost unique. I can't think of anything else which really looks the part on this scale in an area like this. Public art's one of those conundrums because nothing is really ever permanent. I mean, the pyramids aren't permanent. The Colossus of Rhodes certainly wasn't permanent. Nothing is really going to be around forever.
I think Greg John's work in Corten steel has got a very good chance of lasting for a remarkably long time. It's a highly durable material and, I would like to see it lasting forever. I don't see any reason for this being regarded as an ephemeral work to be having a very limited 5 or 10 year life.
This work, I would hope, would be as permanent as the development itself. So I can't see any reason why this sculpture won't sit here as a perfectly good part of this development for as long as the buildings themselves are here. We've had a few things in the past where people have made site-specific works in Sydney and then they've gone and put them somewhere else. The most notorious example being Richard Goodwin's work, which was sitting on the top of Macquarie Street and then was moved down next to the Art Gallery of New South Wales, even though he said it was site-specific. Well, site-specific doesn't seem to mean very much in a public space. I think the saving grace for Greg here is that he's inside what is pretty much a private development, so that gives him a measure of protection from all of the tricky things that go on with councils and with civic space.
Let's hope that it's there for a long, long time.
Engineering-wise, it's an absolutely amazing thing to bring from Adelaide and install in Sydney in 2 pieces. So he's always capable of doing the tough stuff.
Greg's very much within a tradition of sculptors. He is working in Corten steel. There is a sense in which sculptors in Australia almost divide between those who use metal, the so-called heavy metal boys, and those who find something else to do. And of course, those other kind of sculptors now are flourishing in many different directions. You have people making very realistic figures in latex and silicon. You have all sorts of very tricky installation art. You have things incorporating light and video. But I think Greg is really of an absolute tradition in sculpture. The best idea with public art in general is to keep it simple. And the best works are very simple things that reflect the complexities of the community, because they don't try and pin down particular stories or particular interest groups. They have to have some kind of general purpose.
The fact that he's called it a land mandala, I think he's trying to link and achieving the link between the mandala, which was an object of contemplation and meditation. He's bringing about a link between those sort of ancient forms and a link with the land forms. They're very much organic.
There's a kind of a graphic quality which to me seems quite a development from the previous work of his that I've seen, which was a bit more static. It's the way the sculpture claws and twists around, it reminds me a little bit like Hokusai's wave. The way the wave actually reaches over almost like a hand ready to grasp. And I think this sculpture has something of that too. It seems to clutch at the air, it seems to twist and turn almost of its own accord. And that's all you can ask of a sculpture, really. I mean, if a sculpture does anything else, if it helps to, save our souls or change the world, well, that's fantastic. But I think in this particular case, it inhabits space, it makes the place work, and it does a great job.
Fairly good reaction from most people.
Oh, that's good.
Came in here, we saw this sculpture, and we were just absolutely taken aback by the majesty and the intricacy and the industrialness and the almost the spirituality of the piece. And we noticed that the joins were very, very finely crafted, and we imagined that it was all done on computers and all this sort of stuff. It's had some form of impact on me. I guess it's best described as beauty or whatnot, but it's a really, really striking piece that actually has an effect on you, and it draws you in. And if you notice that the way that the square is designed, it's the centerpiece of the whole square, and it's almost like it's a mandala, and I was actually quite interested to see that there was actually the label of it, because I know something of those, what they mean, and the energy goes to this mandala and it radiates out into the whole square. It's actually quite an amazing structure, and it actually provides the most beautiful thing, I think, in the area.
And I like it because you can slide down it.
So the sculpture's installed, it's done. I would like to think it's a significant piece for Sydney, and there's a settling in process going on now. From the beginning with this piece again, I think to do pieces that make a statement and to get those works up so that they relate to site, but they still work as statement sculptures is really important, and it's still very difficult to do that. At the end of the project, with the sculpture now installed, there's been some really interesting little incidents that have occurred. Around the sculpture there's a number of tables and chairs. I had no role to play in this, but I must admit I find them as cluttering up the work to a fair extent. The cables at the top of the sculpture, which was taken on as an issue from the beginning for the work, I think they're resolved reasonably, but I guess in a perfect world I'd probably prefer that they actually weren't there. But in the balance of making sculpture in the public realm, to get a work up, I've never been much of a compromiser over the situation, but I will try to get the work installed, and there may be some details I can't entirely take care of, and probably both of these have been a couple of details. One other issue, a public liability issues arisen, and there's now a fence around the sculpture. Yeah, it's an interesting one. We seem to be living in a extremely safe world right now. I mean, I still think sculpture has a really important role to play in the public realm, but I think people have to realise that as climbing structures and such, there's a whole range of climbing structures that are in the public realm that people can hurt themselves on. I hope that the cultural significance of the sculpture will be considered in relation, in a balance factor with these issues as well, because the issues around the public safety have certainly reached a stage where I think they're starting to impinge on being able to put up significant sculpture. And I've always been somebody who's considered the safety issues very closely, but I think there's a balance to be struck about the whole thing as well. And I think the issues around the fence and such will resolve themselves at a point in time. Some of the other issues will settle down, but in the big picture, I'd like to think it's a large work that now has been installed and one that relates to site and hopefully works well.